Hello and welcome to the Guest Education Global Leadership Summit. Thank you so much for joining us. We're pleased to introduce you to Dr. Helen Wright, Executive Leadership Coach, International Education Advisor, and former school principal, and Alex McGrath, founder of Castlegate Education, former Global Director of Schools at the British Council, and former principal of 2 UK independent schools. We'll be sharing their experiences as international education leaders, working with schools and school leaders all over the world. We hope that you enjoy the session, and over to you, Dr. Helen.
Thank you. Thanks, Danny. And I know, Alex, we should be sitting in Dubai having this conversation, shouldn't we?
Oh, if only.
Never mind. We are here surrounded by our worldly possessions. And this is going to be quite a bit of fun, isn't it? Because we're going to be talking about just what we've learnt over the years. But we've been in touch for some time. We've known one another for some time, haven't we, Alex?
Yeah, I think the first time we're talking about leadership, but the first time I met you, Helen, I was a follower, not a leader, because I was part of a conference there in sunny Cardiff in Wales, and you were giving a talk at the time as a very well respected and very experienced principal from the UK. And I was a new head teacher, very, very green. And I really enjoyed what you had to say. I went up and spoke to you at the end. And then I thought, well, there's someone who could be a mentor for me in the future. And then you disappeared and you went off to Australia. So then we lost touch for a little while. And it'd be interesting to know what you learned about being out there on the other side of the world and completely changing your leadership direction.
Oh, do you know, that's so right. I did come back from Australia, as you can see. But when I went to Australia, I'd been a principal I'd had 2 headships in the UK. I'd done all sorts of national roles. I sort of developed those. I was president of the Girls' Schools Association, vice chair of the Independent Schools Council, done all of those things. And I could really say that one of my key learnings in all of that. And I think what prompted me to go out to Australia was that sense that as leaders, we've got to keep learning. If we're going to be authentic leaders, we've got to keep taking those risks that we expect our students to do. But otherwise, how can we truly say that we're leading? So going internationally, I'd already done, increasingly as you go on, you do more international things. So I was going to international conferences, I was connecting with people, and going and living somewhere else and being somewhere else for a time was really important to me. In actual fact, it was really interesting because going out to Australia, in a sense, I was going from one national system to another international system. And what I've learned since then, it's 7 years since I stopped being a principal. What I've learned since then is how much I really value the international, which is why I work with international schools, through recruitment, with LSE education, the executive coaching I do, which I love. I love that. But I suppose the big learning from all of that is you have to keep taking risks. You've got to keep learning and pushing yourself. But you've done that as well. You've taken lots of risks in your leadership.
I certainly have. Being a head teacher was for me, I think it was always going to be the pathway. When I started out as a teacher, I thought, well, obviously I'm going to end up going to the top of the tree and being a head. And the first thing I learned being a head was I wasn't the boss. I think that's the governing body are most certainly the bosses. And
everyone else is your boss apart from you, I think. Is that not
there's that too. Obviously you learn that being a servant leader is the important lesson that I think anyone has to learn in any walk of life. But certainly I think in my first headship, I think I was promoted before I was ready. I wasn't even 40 years old at the time. I was certainly, I'd gone quite quickly through various middle leadership roles, which I'd really enjoyed and been successful at. But I think the problem was I'd looked at headship as the pinnacle. And actually, a number of things were abundantly clear to me. As I say, first of all, I had a vision that I wanted to put in place. And it soon became apparent that didn't fit with the vision of the governing body. They wanted someone, I think, who could keep the ship steady. I saw a changing educational world in which we had to adapt. And I think one of the things that you were saying before about needing to keep learning, I felt at the time that many of the UK independent schools were living in a bit of a bubble, to be honest. You'd go to an HMC conference or something like that, and these are great schools, and people knew they were great schools doing great things, but there wasn't much of a worldview. And I'd started to see that worldview. I went for a second principal role in Eastern Europe. I did a master's in leadership and education at Nottingham University, which was really challenging and opened my eyes to the vista of worldwide education. And I thought, no, we need to be helping our children, our teachers, look outward. Now, that was about a decade ago. Yes. And boy, has the world changed. And has the UK independent sector changed in that sense, in that so many schools now are engaging overseas, many opening campuses overseas. And that's the work I'm involved in now, because I really feel there's genuine quality in the UK. But there's a big mistake that I think British educators make if they go overseas to try and deliver more of the same. You know, you can't pick up something which has been developing over hundreds of years and plonk it in the desert or in a jungle or on a beach somewhere. You really have to found a new school, and that means you've got to be absolutely up to date with the way things are. And I saw a really interesting post on LinkedIn recently by Simon Sinek, and he was talking about mentoring. And how we always think of a mentor as somebody who's someone more experienced than us, doing the job that we want to be doing. But he was saying often it really is important that leaders listen to people coming behind them, people who are younger, hungry, absorbing information, trying to develop themselves, because that will keep that leader current. And I think that's something which, again, really is important when you're starting to engage internationally. You're always going to be learning something new. You're going to be coming up against new cultures and new ways of pedagogy and so on. And that became abundantly clear to me when I was working in China. There's a huge potential to develop bilingual education, not just in China, but worldwide. But what you have there is Chinese wanting to learn from Western teachers wanting to learn from Chinese teachers. But actually, if you're delivering, for instance, a UK pedagogy to a Chinese colleague, you can't deliver it in the medium of a UK pedagogy, because that Chinese colleague has not grown up with that kind of learning experience themselves, and vice versa. And then you start to become guilty of generalization, where you think, oh, there's a Western pedagogy. Well, Americans teach differently than Brits, and as you'll know, Australians do too. So there's a whole range of learnings that have come from that experience. But I'd be interested to know what your perspective is on that, and especially on the mentoring, because that's clearly a huge part of what you're involved in now, coaching and mentoring leaders.
No, absolutely. And I think, and what you're saying resonates so strongly. And I mean, and you have developed the expertise in that. That's why it's so brilliant that you're working with schools to help them develop this and understand this, because you're right, schools can't just go from a position of blindness from 0 to 60, just saying, well, I'm sure we can do this. And I think what I've learned about that, and it ties in with the coaching, it ties in with the mentoring, is about connection and really understand. One of the reasons why I've moved into this more plural career, this portfolio that I have, because I do various non-executive roles, chair school board, chair other educational charities, do the recruitment, senior leaders, work as an executive coach. But one of the reasons I moved into that was because actually it's wonderful being able to connect people to different other people, because we're learning, we're humanity. is phenomenal. We all know so many things, but if we go through, oh, I know the way to do it, I can do it my way, then we're missing out on everything. So I love that connection, being able to connect people. I also love catalyzing people as well, kind of getting the challenge that there is there. I think I always liked that when I was a school principal, but being able to do that now with school leaders and work with them. And you're right about the mentoring. The mentoring comes from everywhere. Mentoring isn't about sitting, learning, and being handed down. It's about learning around. Why I trained in coaching and executive coaching, that real deep one-to-one work, a lot of work with psychometrics, a lot of work really challenging people. Why I did that was because so much of the answers are inside you, but you need other people and exposure to other things in order to be able to release that. So sometimes what holds people back is that they don't think they can. Well, we can help people make sure that they can, but we can also help connect people to make sure that they understand there are lots of other people to work from. And from working in teams, that the power of collaboration, the power of being able to work with people, there's huge leadership a learning in there, that you cannot do this by yourself. No one can, but there is a whole area that anyone is there to help you. You just have to reach out and not be afraid to do that. So that's that courage and that fearlessness, I think. And I think that's, I found that hugely liberating. I found it, I love connecting people. And I love quite apart from the fact that it's a major driver around international education, the fact that our young people today have got to learn to be globally competent. They have to learn to appreciate other cultures. They have to do that, because otherwise, well, it's like, we're not saying we're doomed. They're not, but they have to do that. So we need to encourage them. We need to show the way. We need to show it's eminently possible. You can connect with anyone in the world. Forget this 6 degrees of separation. I think it's probably about 1.4 by now. It really is very. In fact, Facebook did and this was I know Facebook's not everybody's cup of tea, but they did a survey. It was a few years ago, and they showed it was something like 3.6 or something, and that will have narrowed now. But we have to encourage people, and it starts with school leaders. It starts with them. If not them, then who? So I would say that's a major learning. Does that resonate?
Well, absolutely. When you're talking about reaching out to people for help, I think the other thing that I've learned with teams that I've been involved with, as I say, at first I felt as a new young head that I had my vision and I wanted to implement it, and people had to come with me. But why the hell should they? And actually it was a good lesson. It was quite a hard lesson that I took in that first headship. And when I went into the next one, I was much more collaborative. I was much more humble. And what I found was the response of my team to that was so much more rewarding for me, because first of all, they were open. Secondly, they were so pleased to be asked. They were given a sense of purpose. They were given a sense of value, hugely valued by being asked to be collaborators in a project or whatever. And that certainly helped when I then went to the British Council, which is all about cultural relations and education on the deepest level and the widest level. And maybe 95% of our colleagues in the British Council were not English. They were people from the countries in which we operated. That our offices would tend to have a sea of different faces from different cultures, and very few British people there. And that's because we absolutely needed, if we were to engage with the countries with whom we worked, we needed people who were from that country, who understood the culture and so on. And I think that translates hugely into schools, because as schools are becoming bilingual, international schools are becoming bilingual or trilingual in some cases, in some cultures, you have parents who are not. And so it's all very well their children being given the great advantages of this global outlook, but you need people who can communicate with parents. who understand what parents' desires and ambitions and worries are for their children, and can give them the reassurance, can help them to understand what's going on. And I noticed something, there was something published only in the end of February by ISC Research. They did a white paper looking at how parents of international schools now are asking much more about well-being, for instance, of their children than they used to. But they're also, those schools, the smart ones, are starting to think, how do I reach out to parents? Now that comes from the senior leaders in those schools realizing that the way they make their schools successful is by engaging with their community. And the big mistake which anyone might make who's trying to take a UK brand or a US brand or a Canadian brand or whatever to a foreign country is to use that school as a cash cow, to try and get the money back to the school in their home country so that they can sustain that business. Because these schools have to be siblings of the original. Otherwise, you're not serving your community. And the more I have reflected on leadership, the more I have thought it's about developing a service and making sure that that's not some, I don't know, namby-pamby soft word. It's hard work, and it needs to be resilient work, and it needs to be ongoing work. And it has to come from the leadership downwards, whether that's leadership is the school board or the senior management team, or even at middle leadership level, which is something we haven't spoken about much. But the middle leaders are the people who are so connected very often with what is going on in the classroom.
Yes, yeah, and often the engine of the school, in fact, because middle leaders, you capture middle leaders, encourage them to be part of the vision, then you've got that uniqueness of thought there, the diversity of thought, and you have that ability to be able to know exactly what is happening at the old-fashioned chalk face. But those two words, that uniqueness and diversity, they're words that are coming to me listening to you talk, because there are two things that resonate very strongly with my leadership learnings. That first of all, every school is different. It just is. It's a different combination. I deal with hundreds of schools every year, one way or another, whether it's coaching their leaders or working, recruiting, or whatever it is, a huge amount. Before COVID, it's a great joy to go and visit schools and soak them up and understand what they're about. Every single school is different, and it has a unique community. And do you know what? It should be different every single day as well, because children are a bit more educated every day. There's something going on. People are learning and growing. It's a place there. And valuing that uniqueness and difference is as important as valuing the sameness, the similarity, the connection. And it's a complex dynamic. But for a governing body to appreciate that and to be driven by those values, those strong underpinning values, that's what makes the difference in schools. And that brings me to the point about diversity, because it's been one of the areas that I've really been very interested in. It's driven me over the past few years, particularly on boards. And there's an increasing amount of evidence out there that shows that diverse organizations are actually financially more successful. In actual fact, regardless, and it's not just diversity isn't a nice to have; it's actually really essential. Exactly the same is true of schools and school boards, and that's one of my powerful learnings about leadership generally, is to appreciate that diversity and to actively encourage it and develop it, and make sure that people don't see this as either a nuisance or a tick box exercise. But school leaders often have to lead their boards too.
Absolutely.
It's not the other way around. Just like you were saying about mentoring, and that some people describe as reverse mentoring, where you're learning from people coming behind. Actually, school leaders spend often as much time managing boards, or should be spending as much time managing the boards, engaging with the boards, as they are managing and leading in other ways.
And that's a subtle dance, isn't it, as well, Helen? You know, and we've goodness,
yes.
it's not a. There are some people on boards that you probably wouldn't want to dance with either, but but you have to occasionally. It's a sort of, you can't have a gentleman's
value.
You can't have a gentleman's excuse me with everybody. But there was. I'm thinking as well of another area of educational leadership that I've been involved with, and that's being involved with a charitable trust. So I've been a trustee for a few years of the Commonwealth Education Trust, and one of the really important things that shaped that organisation, it had been set up quite a long time ago to develop education across the Commonwealth. And I mean, a very long time ago. This is a very paternalistic, almost Victorian kind of idea. And it needed to be modernized. And first of all, the board put in place a very young, dynamic CEO. She had been involved in sales for a Scandinavian ed tech company before. And this board thought, we need someone new and punchy who actually understands what's going on out there. She then recruited trustees onto the board who made it more diverse. This was a trust for the Commonwealth. Every single person on it was white and from either the UK or New Zealand. Nice. When I joined the board as a white middle-aged man as well from the UK, and actually over time. What was so important is realizing, first of all, that we had to change our dynamic, change our offer in the way that the CEO decided we should, allow her to lead us in that sense while still guiding her, creating a product which was going to serve people. So what we did was we looked at the issues in the Commonwealth. So much was focused on children, child poverty, the importance of getting girls into education, really important things. But what we realized was teachers often just did not have the leadership, the training that for some of us was taken for granted. Yes. And so what we did was we developed online courses that could be delivered very, very easily to teachers who would become the educational leader in their sub-Saharan village. You know, they would educate every child in that village, often all at the same time, 100 in a class, and they needed skills and they needed confidence, and it was so important. But then we had the problem with funding, and the way we got that funding was by diversifying the board and finding people who understood the kinds of places we were reaching out to, and having board directors who were from these regions and could start to really help us tailor what we needed to give to those communities. And that was most rewarding part of a different kind of leadership, of being a trustee. Now, I think one of the difficulties that a leader might have managing a board is you might have a charitable organization. Many UK schools are charities, of course. You could also have a very commercial organization, and that's happening frequently, running schools now. But the people who are the heads or deputy heads of the schools are still very much focused, one hopes, on the children, on the parents, on the staff they have. And they have quite a tricky time in some contexts to try and make sure that they can help very, very commercial people on their boards to understand the importance of delivering quality.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people in business, of course, do understand that if they deliver a quality product, they can maximize their profits and everyone's a winner. But it has taken time for some parts of the international school community to realize how important this is, and to realize the benefits of doing it.
I'm co-facilitating at the moment, actually. Of course, we're running it again starting again in April, over 5 weeks, about better boards. And it's an online course, working with that working with Matthew Savage with LSC Education again, to really help people understand, help board members in international schools understand the value of values, and to working through that and helping them to appreciate that it is actually a win-win at the end. But you also make another point. I would say this is one of my learnings about leadership as well, is that school leaders do need to go outside their schools as well, and taking on other roles, like being a trustee, being involved in not just networking, cluster groups and so on within education, but actually going beyond that, doing something else, is really helpful because it brings perspective. And you also take that time to be able to reflect on what's really important. So you learn a lot. You're dealing with lots of other people. A school leader who is purely internally focused is not going to be able to have the same impact eventually as somebody who's been able to be out, to be connected, to appreciate, to take some time to reflect as well. So I would say that's a really important, valuable process to go out and do that. And you recognize that people are people wherever they are, and flawed or wonderful. And it's looking at how other organizations work, trying to take the best of the best to bring that back so that each unique child in the school has the opportunity to grow and change. So I would always recommend that to leaders. Go out, look around, do other things, stretch yourself, work hard, because actually hard work is good and it's worthwhile. And yes, of course, everyone needs a balance and you don't want people to burn out. But it's a hugely important role being a school leader. It's that mantle of responsibility. So own that, take that on, use it for the good. And it doesn't have to be, I think we've all been guilty at the beginning of our careers saying, oh, follow me, I've got some exciting ideas. And I think I was probably guilty of that even towards
I'm
the
glad
end.
it wasn't just me, Helen.
Yes, I think I'm still guilty of it now. Yeah, but it can be tempered. It can be tempered in lots of ways. So yes, you want a bit of that from me, but you also want a bit of kind of, look what I've learned and I want to share with you, and let's connect.
And I think one of the things that that really resonates to me from what you're saying there is, I started off doing that by dipping my toe in. There's a trap, isn't there, when you're leading an educational institution? It becomes all-consuming, and of course, your primary concern are the children or the parents or the teachers in your school. So of course you're looking down and you're looking inward. But in order to serve that community properly, you need to find out what's going on in the wider world. And I started to dip my toe into that. Firstly, just going along to practically every conference I could, listening to key people talking at those conferences. And then it became writing. Now, at the time, 10 years ago, you didn't have the luxury of something like LinkedIn, where you can put a little 1-minute piece out there to share with people. But writing articles for magazines, and I wrote a couple of books. One of them is a particularly, I got the timing completely wrong, because I wrote a book on educational technology, which was published in 2014, called Classroom in the Cloud. And the reason was not because I was an expert in EdTech, but because we as a school had decided we were going to have bring your own device. And I started to realize that no one in the school really knew anything about it. So I wrote a book really to say, well, what's going on out there in the world as a sort of the captain of a ship being tossed around on a stormy sea, but actually not really knowing. I knew kind of where I was going, but I didn't know exactly how to get there. And so each chapter was almost finding out more and more about that world of EdTech out there. And the conclusion was, we needed as schools to start using blended learning. We needed to start using our classroom expertise, putting some of it online, finding out how to integrate it into our learning. Now, when I was presenting this to my governors, all that they were saying at the time was, how expensive is this going to be? How can we possibly resource this? We can't do this. And a friend of mine who was head of another school had the same conversation with his governors at the time. And he got in touch and said, I've read your book. And I think there's something in this, but I'm just being told we haven't got the time. Goodness me, if only, 5 or 6 years ago, schools had started to do those kind of things. And it wasn't because I was brilliant. It was because I was starting to scan the horizon.
Yes,
seeing where the monsters were.
Yes.
And I think this is to your point, that as you venture into the areas of education that you're not particularly savvy with, going overseas, for instance, engaging with a new regulator, a new education system, a new group of teachers of a different nationality and pedagogy, for instance, going into commercial education, perhaps from the charitable sector, which is another thing that we both have done, and is quite a psychological step for many of us to take. All of those things have been hugely valuable and have opened so many doors, which mean that I know I've got a much richer career as a result.
Yeah, and do you know what? We could keep talking for hours, but I know our
run
time
out
is
of
up.
time.
Yes, that's right. Yes, we have. But we there is so much to talk about, and Alex, I've really enjoyed this conversation. If I were to ask you to give sort of one just final word of wisdom or phrase of wisdom to people about leadership, what would you say? What advice would you give?
I think it's about positivity. I mean, one of my favorite educationalists, and I'm sure for many people listening, will be Ken Robinson, who sadly died this year. And what he was saying maybe about 8-10 years ago in his great TED talk in Monterey was that, we had this 19th century system and it wasn't changing and we needed innovation. And after a few years, I was reflecting on what he was saying, thinking, but things aren't changing. You've still got kids facing the front of the classroom. You've still got a control mentality. But actually, when you really step back, I don't think that is the case. I think lots of people now are really thinking, what do the children need to engage with the changing world? What have they needed to engage with sudden impacts of things like the pandemic? Schools are positive places if they're run well. They're always evolving. They're always dynamic. And I think the thing that stays the same is quality. Quality educators, quality leaders will adapt to the changes that come. They'll assess them and decide which are fads and worth taking on and which actually they need to embrace. And that requires an enormous amount of positive resilience. So stay positive.
Yes. And I would add to that, go for it in your leadership journey. So there we are. We've come to the end. I've really enjoyed this, Alex. So thank you.
I have as well. Yeah, great to see you again as well.
Yeah.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Helen and Alex, for your insightful conversation. If anyone from the audience has any questions pertaining to the session, you can connect with Dr. Helen and Alex through the networking system on the virtual event platform. We'd also love to hear from you, so feel free to share any thoughts or comments by sending us an email to marketing@guesteducation.com. We'll be on social media as well during the summit, so if you want to chat to us there, follow us on Twitter @guesteducation, use the hashtags #guestglobal and #guesteducation. We hope that you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you, take care, and bye-bye for now. Thank you so much, Dr. Helen and Alex.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.